You are a woman, and you are about to attempt the most dangerous thing your body will ever do. And the strange part is that it is dangerous for the exact same reason you are human at all. Two things separate our species from every other animal on this planet. The first is that we walk upright on two legs. The second is that we carry an enormous brain. Both of those traits get described as triumphs, the features that let our ancestors spread across every continent and outthink every rival alive. But there is one place inside the human body where those two triumphs meet, and they do not cooperate. They collide. That place is the birth canal, and the collision is childbirth. Walking upright reshaped the female pelvis into a tighter, more compact ring of bone, because a narrow pelvis is what makes efficient two-legged movement possible. At the very same time, the swelling human brain pushed the size of the newborn skull larger and larger across the generations. So you are left with a body trying to pass the largest head in the animal kingdom, relative to its size, through one of the tightest openings. For almost the entire span of human history, that single mismatch killed women in numbers that are hard to hold in your mind. And the way ancient women actually survived it is not the answer most people would ever guess. If this story is touching your heart, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if a woman in your family came west with nothing and built a home, share her name in the comments. I read every one. To understand what they were up against, you have to understand something almost nobody is taught about how human birth works, because it is unlike the birth of any other creature. When a monkey or an ape gives birth, the shape of the mother's pelvis is simple. The widest part of the opening runs the same direction the whole way through, so the infant travels straight down and emerges facing forward, toward the mother's own body. That small detail matters more than it sounds. It means the mother can reach down with her own hands, guide the baby the rest of the way out, wipe the fluid from its face, and lift it to her chest, all by herself, with no help from anyone. A chimpanzee gives birth alone and seems to prefer it. The human pelvis refuses to be that simple. Because upright walking twisted and narrowed the bones, the widest part of the entrance runs side to side, while the widest part of the exit runs front to back. The two openings are turned at right angles to each other, so a human baby cannot travel in a straight line. It has to rotate, turning its head to fit through the entrance, then corkscrewing a quarter turn as it drops so its shoulders can clear the exit. And when it finally emerges, it comes out facing backward, away from the mother, toward the base of her spine. That backward turn changes everything. A mother reaching for a baby that faces away from her cannot cradle its head without bending its neck and spine the wrong way, against the natural curve, which risks real injury. She cannot easily see its face to clear its mouth and nose so it can take a first breath. She cannot reliably lift it to her body without help. For the first time in the history of primates, the animal giving birth truly needed another pair of hands. This is the idea at the center of the work of two anthropologists, Karen Rosenberg and Wenda Trevathan, who spent years studying the mechanics and the evolution of human birth. Their argument is a radical one. They proposed that assisted birth, one human being helping another deliver a child, is not a modern invention and not even a recent one. It may be one of the oldest social behaviors our lineage has, reaching back potentially hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, toward the moment our ancestors first stood upright and their pelvises began to change. In other words, the first midwife may predate farming, predate cities, predate written language, predate almost everything we picture when we picture human culture. The oldest profession may not be the one people joke about. It may be the woman who knelt down to catch a child. How far back does the danger really reach? Look at the most famous fossil skeleton ever found. The more than 3 million-year-old remains of an early human relative nicknamed Lucy, uncovered in Ethiopia. Even her pelvis, belonging to a creature that walked upright but still carried a small ape-sized brain, already shows the flattened, twisted shape that forces a baby to turn as it is born. That means the awkward, dangerous, assistance-demanding style of human birth may have begun long before our own species existed, back when our ancestors first traded life in the trees for life on two legs. The problem is far older than humanity, and so is the solution. Picture what that meant in real life. Somewhere in the deep past, a woman in labor was surrounded not by machines and not by strangers, but by other women who had been through it themselves, who knew the signs, who knew how to position a body, when to step in, and what to do when something went wrong. That knowledge was never written down. It lived inside people, handed from one woman to the next across countless generations, sharpened by every birth that went well and every birth that did not. It was, in the most literal sense, life or death information, and it was one of the most valuable things a community owned. Think about how much skill that really took. A practiced midwife could feel through a woman's belly and tell which way the baby was lying. She knew how to coax a breech baby, one trying to come feet first, into a safer position, or how to reach in and free a shoulder that had jammed against the bone. She knew the difference between ordinary bleeding and the kind that meant a woman had only minutes left. She knew which leaves to steep and when silence was worth more than any remedy. None of it was written in a book, because there were no books. It was memory, built one birth at a time, and a village that lost its most experienced woman could lose that entire library in a single hard winter. Because the stakes were staggering. We have no records from the Stone Age, but historians can reconstruct the scale of the danger from later populations that still lived without modern medicine. In those groups, very roughly 1 out of every 100 births ended with the mother dead. That number sounds almost survivable until you remember that a woman in those times did not give birth once. She might give birth 6, 8, even 10 times across her life. Stack that risk on top of itself, birth after birth, and the lifetime odds of dying in childbirth could climb towards something like 1 in 10, and in the hardest places, worse, 1 in 10. Look around a room full of women and take one of them away. That was the ordinary price of continuing the species, paid over and over, in every generation for tens of thousands of years. The causes of death stayed brutally consistent across every era we can examine. The first was obstructed labor, when the baby was simply too large or turned the wrong way and could not pass through the pelvis at all. With no surgical option, this was very often a slow death sentence for mother and child alike. The second was bleeding, what doctors call postpartum hemorrhage, when the womb failed to clamp down after delivery, and a woman could bleed to death in minutes. The third was infection in the days after birth, a fever that crept in, spread, and could not be stopped. Ancient women and the people helping them fought all three with the only tools they had. They used position and gravity, keeping the mother upright, squatting, kneeling, or braced on a birthing stool, all of which opened the pelvis wider than lying flat and let the weight of the baby help the labor along. They used their hands to turn a baby that sat wrong, and they used plants, some of which truly worked. Certain herbs held compounds that make the womb contract, which could help push a baby out or slow the bleeding afterward. The same basic chemistry that later medicine would isolate, purify, and put in a bottle. None of it made birth safe. It only shifted the odds, one small degree at a time, and when you are standing at the edge of death, one small degree is the whole world. The grief left marks in the ground. Across the ancient world, archaeologists keep finding the same heartbreaking grave, a young woman buried together with a tiny newborn. The two of them laid to rest in the same moment, because they died in the same one. These double burials are among the most sorrowful and most common tragedies in the entire human record, a reminder that behind every dry statistic was a specific woman, with a face and a name that time has erased. For a long time, everything we knew about these ancient practices came from bones and inference, but now and then, the ground gives up something remarkable. In the year 2001, an archaeological team from the University of Pennsylvania, led by Josef Wegener, was digging at Abydos in southern Egypt when they uncovered a mud brick unlike any found before. It was a birthing brick, one of a pair that a laboring woman would have crouched upon nearly 4,000 years ago, lifting her body off the ground to give the baby room to descend. What made it extraordinary was the paint. Across its surface were images of a mother seated with her newborn, attended by helpers and watched over by protective figures, including a goddess the Egyptians tied to childbirth. Here, at last, was direct physical proof of what anthropologists had long suspected. Birth was upright, birth was assisted, birth was wrapped in ritual and belief, and the conviction that the moment deserved protection. That single brick is a snapshot of a practice that was already old when it was made. One thread in a rope of custom, stretching back further than any writing can follow. If you're still with us on this porch, do this story a kindness. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell. These quiet stories don't get told if you don't share them. Tag someone who loves a true frontier story in the comments. Let them know we're telling these the way they deserve to be told. For thousands of years after that, the fundamentals barely moved. Women gave birth at home, upright, surrounded by female midwives and relatives, and the outcomes, dangerous as they were about as good as they could be without any understanding of what actually caused death. Then, strangely, parts of the world made a change that made things worse. As medicine professionalized, birth began moving out of the home and into the hospital, and out of the hands of experienced midwives and into the hands of male physicians. Two things happened at once. First, the position changed. Doctors found it more convenient to have a woman lie flat on her back, which is easier to observe but works against gravity, and partly closes the very outlet the baby needs. There is a popular story that this fashion took hold in a royal court, where a king preferred to watch births from a comfortable seat, and so had women lie down. And whether or not that tale is fully true, the flat position spread and stuck. The second change was far deadlier, and it produced one of the most disturbing statistics in the history of medicine. The place that was supposed to be the safest, the modern hospital, was turning into the place where mothers were most likely to die. In the 1700s and 1800s, as births concentrated in hospitals, a horror swept through the maternity wards. Women who delivered in these new institutions were dying of fever at rates far higher than women who gave birth at home in their own beds. Nobody understood why, until a Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis, working in a large hospital in Vienna in the 1840s, noticed something that should have been impossible. His hospital ran two maternity clinics side by side. In one, deliveries were done by doctors and medical students. In the other, they were done by midwives, and the clinic run by doctors had a death rate from childbed fever several times higher than the clinic run by midwives, in some months climbing above 1 in 10 women, while the midwives lost far fewer. Semmelweis chased the difference like a detective. The answer, when he found it, was almost too grim to accept. The doctors and students, unlike the midwives, spent their mornings dissecting the bodies of the dead, and then walked straight to the delivery room to examine laboring women, without ever washing their hands. They were carrying death from the corpses on their fingers and pressing it into the women they were meant to save. Semmelweis ordered his doctors to wash their hands in a chlorine solution before touching a patient, and the results were immediate. The death rate in the doctor's clinic collapsed, falling to match, and sometimes beat the midwives' ward. He had, with no knowledge of germs, without a microscope showing him a single living thing, stumbled onto one of the most important survival discoveries ever made. Wash your hands, and mothers live. And here is the part that should stay with you. His colleagues did not celebrate him. They were offended by the suggestion that their own hands, the hands of gentlemen and healers, could carry filth. His ideas were mocked and pushed aside, and Semmelweis died discredited, years before the germ theory of disease finally proved him right. Countless women died in the gap between the moment the answer was known and the moment the world was willing to believe it. It would take another 20 years, and the work of others who finally proved that invisible living things cause disease, before medicine accepted that Semmelweis had been right the entire time. By then, he was gone, and no one could tell him. Now hold that image of 19th century European hospitals failing their mothers, and travel somewhere completely different, because the same century holds a story that flips the usual assumptions on their head. In 1879, a Scottish traveler named Robert Felkin witnessed something in the kingdom of Bunyoro, in what is now Uganda, that Europe at the time could barely manage. He watched a local healer perform a Caesarean section, opening a living woman to deliver her baby. The healer used banana wine to clean the site and to calm the patient, made a swift and confident incision, controlled the bleeding with care, and closed the wound. Both the mother and the child lived. Felkin, who had trained in Western medicine, was astonished, because the operation was carried out with a skill and a set of precautions, including cleaning the site, that European surgeons had not reliably mastered. This was clearly no lucky accident. It was a practiced technique, refined by people with real knowledge of the body, and the lesson is one the modern world keeps forgetting. Life-saving knowledge about birth never belonged to a single civilization. It grew wherever women faced the same ancient danger, and human ingenuity rose to meet it. The Caesarean is worth pausing on, because for most of history, it was not a way to save the mother at all. It was a desperate act performed on a woman already dead or dying, a final attempt to save the baby, because opening the womb almost always killed the woman through bleeding and infection. Not until the late 1800s, when surgeons like Max Sanger worked out how to properly stitch the womb closed, joined with the arrival of anesthesia and sterile technique, did a cesarean become something a mother could routinely survive. That single shift, well within the last 150 years, is one of the biggest reasons childbirth stopped being a coin toss with death. For the vast, uncountable stretch of time before it, that option did not exist. And women survived not because the anatomy was ever truly solved, but because of everything around it. The hands that helped, the knowledge passed down, the positions that worked, the plants that helped the womb contract, and a community that treated a birth as something the whole group had a stake in keeping alive. This is where the story bends towards something stranger still, and it starts with a simple question. If childbirth was this deadly for this long, why did evolution never just fix it? Why not widen the pelvis or shrink the newborn's head and spare our species all that death? For a long time, the standard answer was a tidy trade-off. The idea that the pelvis is as wide as it can get before walking turns inefficient, and the head is as large as it can get before it will not fit, and we are stuck balanced on that painful edge. But in 2012, an anthropologist named Holly Dunsworth and her colleagues challenged that neat picture. Their work suggested that a wider pelvis would not actually wreck a woman's ability to walk or run, which means the anatomy is not held hostage by movement the way everyone had assumed. Instead, they argued, the timing of birth has more to do with a mother's metabolism, with the point where her body can no longer supply enough energy to feed a fast-growing fetus. The baby comes out when it does not because it must, but because the mother reaches her limit. The old trade-off may be less about the width of the hips and more about the furnace of the body that has to fuel the child. And then comes the twist that reaches all the way into the present. We tend to assume human evolution is something that happened to our ancestors and finished long ago, that we are the polished final draft. Childbirth says otherwise. In 2016, a team led by the biologist Philip Mitterrocher published a striking argument. For all of history, babies too big to fit through their mother's pelvis tended to die, and their mothers with them, which kept a steady pressure against very large babies and in favor of pelvises wide enough to pass them. But the cesarean broke that machinery. Now, a baby too large to be born naturally is often delivered safely by surgery, and both mother and child live to pass their traits on. Their model predicted that as cesareans grow common, cases of babies too big for the birth canal should slowly, measurably rise across generations, because the old lethal filter has been switched off. If they are right, something profound is happening in delivery rooms right now. Human beings are not only surviving childbirth. Without meaning to, we are reshaping the anatomy of birth itself, steering our own evolution with a scalpel. Which brings us all the way back to that woman in the deep past, in the dark, doing the most dangerous thing her body would ever do. Everything we have built since, the hospitals, the surgery, the hand-washing, the machines that listen to a heartbeat inside the womb, all of it is astonishingly recent, a thin, bright layer laid over a vast, dark history. And underneath that layer sits the oldest answer of all. The one that carried our species through nearly the whole of its existence, long before any of the science arrived. Strip everything else away, and ancient women did not survive childbirth because their bodies were built for it. In the raw anatomical sense, they never were. They survived because they were not alone. They survived because another woman knelt beside them and reached out a hand. The knowledge in that hand, and the willingness to use it, may be the oldest medicine on Earth. Older than the wheel, older than the written word. Maybe older than our species itself. And every person alive today, every single one, exists only because that hand was there, again and again, across 10,000 generations, in the most dangerous moment human life has ever known. The baby was never the only thing being delivered in that room. Something else arrived alongside it. The simple, world-changing idea that we survive by holding on to each other. Thank you for staying until the last word. If this story moved you, the next one is already up on your screen. Go give it a watch. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and join the porch. We're telling stories about women who carried more than the world ever knew. See you in the next one.